Okay, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. Thomas Dimitroff is here, and we had him on camera. Now we have him back. Okay, Thomas is back. Thomas is on a little bit of a vacation, but because this show we know means so much to our listeners, he is here. Arkansas, right? You're in Arkansas.
I'm in a place called Bentonville, Arkansas. For any of you mountain bikers, it's like one of the mountain bike meccas of the world. Believe it or not, I know everyone thinks west, west, west. This is where the Walmart headquarters are, and the two grandsons have put hundreds of millions of dollars into this city and the infrastructure. And I'm involved on a board with People for Bikes, which is a great nonprofit. And I just figured I needed 3 days to get away, so I jumped over here at an 11-hour drive over here and start a couple parts of the symposium tomorrow. But I'm here and just finished a ride and got in here. So thanks for the delay. I really, really appreciate it. I'm glad I'm on.
Well, we obviously it's been I miss talking to you, but I know you're getting to spend some time with your family, which is great. And if anybody knows, like obviously it was a summer where you didn't get to do that as much.
Yep.
So we obviously appreciate your time whenever we can get it. I, by the way, was sick as hell this weekend with the flu, and so I got on my bike I think Saturday and just biked up to like the gym so I could get like in the eucalyptus. And I got to tell you, Thomas, it was like a 1.5 mile ride, and I was done. I was dead. I think I'm going to be a little bit better today after we get done with the show. I'm going to try to get a few more miles in. But yeah, it feels good. And I got to tell you, Atlanta, I certainly traded up in terms of October biking. The weather here is phenomenal. Can't complain much. By the way, people who can complain, we were talking about this before we got on. We're not going to go through the Patriots-Raiders game in depth, but I got to tell you, that safety that Mac Jones took cost a lot of people a lot of money. For anybody who didn't know, that point spread was 3. They were down by 2. They got the ball. They completed a pass penalty, delay a game penalty. He takes the safety. They lose by 4. A lot of money changed hands on that particular play. That one was a really interesting one, Thomas. Just a brief, like, if you're in Patriots land right now, you're sitting there at 1-5. Your only win was against the Jets team, reeling after the loss of Aaron Rodgers. I don't know if it gets much easier for anybody here moving forward.
Well, I was watching that time and again, Bill tossing the iPad, and I was thinking, oh man, it's got to be tough over there. But I keep saying, wherever Bill ends up, again, whatever it is, that's not even the point here. Is like it's going to be interesting to see how everything starts playing out. What are we 6 games in, and there's all this talk about changing of jobs and hot seat like every year, right? But the fact that someone like Bill is being even talked about where he's going to end up next year, or if he stays, to me, it's unbelievable. Have you been watching? Have there been comments from a lot of the big media? So like, has Eric Mangini made any mentions about his past boss? Some of these people that are doing stuff, Tannenbaum, who's out there making comments about Bill, quite honestly?
Well, even Michael Lombardi, who I know,
Yep.
is his biggest confidant, has had a lot of stuff to say. In fact, Michael Lombardi got a lot of flack today, and I gave him some, frankly. He wrote an article about the Panthers and David Tepper, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit on Wednesday, where, it's been reported. I can't confirm it, but like that he wanted Bryce Young, and maybe the coaching staff and scouts didn't necessarily want Bryce Young. And Michael Lombardi like chalked that up to analytics and said analytics are the problem and the fact that he's a finance guy, when in reality, like the issue is the ownership meddling and what are you willing to deal with there? But like it is interesting because I do think on this podcast, and you have a ton of admiration for Bill Belichick. I think you've stated that a number of times. I think you have been the only one that's actually been willing to sort of cross the line and say, is this the end for him? I think a lot of people are toe tapping around that, and I'm interested to go back. I do read a lot of old newspaper clippings just so I can get an idea, and you probably understand that that's how I get a lot of the context that I get. I kind of want to go back and read about how people in Dallas were talking about Tom Landry when when Jerry Jones, bought the team. I kind of want to go back and read about how people wrote about Chuck Noll in the early 90s when they replaced him with Bill Cowher. And Don Shula. They replaced Don Shula with Jimmy Johnson, interestingly. Like, I think it's interesting because it's very clearly not working in New England anymore. And what I think is worrisome is I don't know if there's any way out. Like, I don't see, like, they get another quarterback in here, that's great. But I don't think he has weapons. Like, Mac Jones threw a perfect pass. Actually, it was a really good, here by Mass. Devontae Parker, like, he threw a perfect pass on the sideline to Devontae Parker. The guy dropped it. And not to say Mac Jones has been good or perfect or anything, but, like, that roster doesn't have a ton of talent. And I wonder, does he have the patience? Or if he is truly chasing, like, this wins record, should he just go to a place that will, like, much like Kansas City with Andy Reid, and open their arms to him, and he can start winning games again?
Look, that's what I'm saying. You mentioned a few minutes earlier in your discussion. Absolutely don't think it's the end for Bill Belichick. Again, whether he stays there or whether he goes somewhere else, this guy is about history, right? He is one of the best ever to coach it. And I think I've said that before. You guys get sick and tired of me saying it. He goes somewhere or there, he's going to finish and accomplish what he wants to accomplish, I believe, record-wise. And obviously things are going awry right now, but I don't see it being the end for him. I think he's got so much to offer. I told you guys, when you see him at the ownership meetings and he steps into those meetings with all the GMs and all the head coaches, he is the dude, right? Still sharper than ever, still on top of everything. And, look, there's a lot still to give back to the NFL. And I think he's going to be focused to do so. It's tough to see that right now. No one feels sorry for Bill. You know that. I mean, tons of money and accomplished so many things. It's just a matter of how it all plays out. So I know we don't want to stay on that topic all day, but it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, there's a lot of hot seat action all over the country right now.
Yeah, for sure. And two teams that don't have coaches on the hot seat, but interestingly, I did want to highlight this. BGamer99, one of our frequent listeners, says, I liked your article about Schwartz. My only problem is I feel like owners are hesitant to hire former head coaches. Plus, DCs aren't the hot ticket item. If you do go to sumersports.com here, our own TJ McCreate actually wrote a really nice article here about Jim Schwartz. Here, if you look at the left, about how well he's doing. Now, TJ actually very predictive, Thomas, wrote this last week before, the display that we saw the other day by the Cleveland Browns defense, right? So that's the one place I do want to talk about, because Cleveland, which is Belichick's old team, your old team as well, they went, they opened up about 3-point underdogs last week, on the look ahead. When Deshaun Watson, was learned to not have, his faculties, they got all the way out to a 10-point underdog at home against the San Francisco 49ers. They got behind 7 points early, but that defense, Thomas, was absolutely breathtaking yesterday. Myles Garrett. I mean, they look at that team, and I think, you look at Andrew Berry, you look at that front office. That defense was its Achilles heel for a lot of the last few years. They go and they get, guys like Dalvin Tomlinson to play the nose tackle. They get Juan Thornhill to play safety. They built kind of that defense, and they really showcased Myles Garrett all around that defensive line. And what it really did, that in addition to some injuries, we saw Trent Williams go down. We saw Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel go down. But with a backup quarterback, in fact, a practice squad quarterback in PJ Walker, they ended up winning that football game. That was one of the more surprising results that we've seen all season. And I think when you look at the 49ers running a little hot, right, I think people overestimating kind of what those first bunch of wins meant for them against who they were against, especially against a team like Dallas, who I think that they match up really well against. And Cleveland, this is a season where maybe because of how bad quarterbacks have been across the board, Cleveland winning with defense, I don't know if it's a flash in the pan the way it would be in previous years.
Yeah, I mean, you've said a lot there, of course. When you start talking, and I know who was the listener there that just mentioned Jim and not going after D coordinators.
Beat Gamer 99, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
beat Gamer 99. Well, my thought on that is, yes, I understand, but the league is very cyclical. Just like the league is focused on some of the younger guys, there are guys like this, like Jim Schwartz, who is really, really intelligent and is a game planning phenom. He's going to go in and he's going to figure out, just like I think Dan Quinn does a lot of times, they're going to go in and figure out the nuances of the system, right? And I'm sure they came in with all of his knowledge and his understanding. And like you said, the defense just stood up and did their thing, which I thought was wildly impressive. I don't necessarily think a guy like Jim Schwartz doesn't ever get an opportunity, or some of these D coordinators. I think the league and the owners are going to go through their time, right? They're going to look at some of the youthful guys and they're going to start realizing, well, wait a minute here. Let's take a deep breath here and let's go back to being and choosing the coach that we really think is best for our organization, our talent, there's so many things that are involved when you decide on a head coach. And a guy like Jim Schwartz, as smart as he is, I think Jim Schwartz, just like there's a number of these former head coaches that get another opportunity, they come back with so much more knowledge. And I think they can be really, really good for an organization that's pitter pattered around with some of the younger guys. I'm not saying they're not good, but maybe that is right. When we were in Atlanta, Mike Smith, like I told you, a fantastic football coach, got us to a point. We brought in Dan Quinn, of course, completely different personality. Owners will look at guys like whoever they have as their head coach, and if they're ever moving on, they can look at a guy like Jim Schwartz and say, all right, this guy's more established, really, really smart, and a game planning phenom. Get the right offensive mind in there. Just because he's not an offensive guy doesn't mean that they won't go after him. That's my take on it. I think there's going to be some really interesting guys up there. And because I think people continue to take shots at some of these guys that don't have a lot of experience and they're not always working out. So that's my thought on it.
Yeah, Mojal has a really good point here. D'Amico Ryans, the DC who became Texans head coach. Texans are being very encouraging team right now. They went ahead and beat a New Orleans Saints team that was favored on the road against them yesterday, a team that many people thought was going to be in the playoffs. They downed them. They were very competitive last week in Atlanta as well. And I think with Jim Schwartz, Thomas, it's like that Detroit team that he took over was 0-16. And I think Rod Marinelli, good coach, right? But that team didn't necessarily have any talent. And then they get Stafford in the fold. They deal with a few injuries to Stafford in 09 and 10. 2011, they're in the playoffs. They're competing. 2013 was kind of the end for him after they kind of faded down the stretch, and that was when he got fired. But then you look at Jim Caldwell took over for him, and they made the playoffs in 3 out of 4 years. He built the talent up on that team, and he's never really gotten a shot after that. He was very good with Philadelphia, very instrumental in their Super Bowl run. And so I think that he's probably earned it if he wants it. I think being a head coach is tough on defensive guys, because I think that running a defense is sort of this special kind of like get the dip in and sort of really dial in, and it's sort of hard sometimes. But we saw it with Sean McDermott, who is still doing a pretty good job as the Bills head coach, even though he's had to take over defensive play calling from Leslie Frazier. So I think that there's a shot there for Schwartz.
Yeah, and look, I mean, D'Amico's an interesting candidate, right? He's a guy that played there. The family loves him, right? The McNairs love him. The fact that he's there, he was a very strong underrepresented candidate who comes in as a former player who has a really good understanding of defense, of course, and get the right people in there. And I know, they're going with young Slowick, Bob Slowick's son, who's the OC, young guy, and he's doing a solid job there. So, look, I think it just depends on the organization, right? I mean, I really do believe you really have to factor in a lot of different things. So it's going to be interesting to see, where that next wave of head coaches are going to be coming in this year, which is something that we do at Sumer, right? We're doing a lot of background work on, digging into all the data that we have out there to make some suggestions to some of the teams that are interested in asking us. and inquiring with us, right? So you might want to comment a little bit on that, because I think we can do some, provide some really good information.
Well, yeah, I think that segues into this next game that I do want to talk about, because we do have two teams that played in Atlanta yesterday who are kind of in that realm, right? Where you look at Washington, where Ron Rivera is in year 4, the first 3 years has only netted one playoff berth and no winning seasons. Atlanta's on year 3 with Arthur Smith, and year 3 of Terry Fontenot. And you look at exactly that, Thomas, right? Like Washington, they go get Eric Bieniemy to kind of be, not to besmirch Ron Rivera at all, but like it looks like the heir apparent, the guy who has, per metrics that I've shown off before, has looked really good as a possible head coaching candidate. Arthur Smith was a guy who had similarly good metrics when he was the offensive coordinator with Tennessee, elevating a team with kind of a middle of the pack quarterback in Ryan Tannehill, as you know. And Washington was coming off of a 20-point loss to a previously winless Bears team. They go on the road. The Falcons just coming off of a 2-point win against a Houston team that we just talked about that's kind of on the up and up. And it was just kind of a litany of mistakes for the Falcons. The Falcons outgained Washington by over 200 yards yesterday, Thomas. Sam Howell took 5 sacks. He's on pace to lead, to set a record, Thomas, for the number of sacks taken by a quarterback in an NFL season. And yet 3 interceptions by Desmond Ridder, red zone trips that just didn't bear fruit. And now we're looking at a Falcons team that one of the easiest schedules in the NFL moving forward, but also one of the easiest schedules in the NFL to this point. And they're just 3-3, the same record that Washington has, with a much tougher slate. This game, I think, could have taken the NFL in a number of different directions, and now you have question marks abounding for both teams.
Yeah, let's talk Washington for a minute. I mean, you have obviously a new owner. You have a coach who has, as you had just mentioned, I mean, Ron's obviously a talented football coach, has coached for a long time in the league. Some people would argue otherwise, his track record or lack of a track record, for playoff games, but he's a football dude, right? He understands it. And then you get Martin Mayhew, who's a second-time GM. By the way, we've talked about this, right? Where you get general managers, and everyone always says that GMs don't get a second chance. He's one of the guys, along with Trent Baalke at Jacksonville, who have gotten second chances. Now there's Trent starting to rock, right? Things are rolling down there in Jacksonville. What's going on in Washington, and how are people going to approach? How is the new ownership going to approach, what Martin does there, right? And Martin's a former player as well. Good guy, understands football. We've said this time and again. It's about the big decisions, however, and these new owners that come in with Magic Johnson, by the way, who's been pretty outspoken. What's going on there with this team? So it'll be interesting to see, when they start talking. I've even heard Bill's name. Bill goes up, Bill Belichick going up to Washington to be the dude there, to be the czar there. How does that owners, what does that owner and Magic Johnson say? Like, look, and beyond, right? It's just, it will be interesting. We'll talk about Atlanta in a second, but what are your thoughts about Washington that way?
Yeah, I mean, Martin Mayhew, right, was the starting cornerback on the last time the Washington football team won a Super Bowl, right? Josh Harris is a longtime fan of the team, right? So you can imagine all these feels, right, where similar to the DeMeco Ryans thing, where it's like you're part of the history there. And yet, when I think of it's interesting because you talk about Baalke doing so well in Jacksonville. What's the ingredient there? It's the quarterback. The quarterback overcomes so much, just like your time in Atlanta, where you made tons of moves. All your drafts generated a ton of value, but really Matt Ryan was the catalyst for a lot of that stuff. And you look at them, you look at Washington. It's like what mired most of Dan Snyder's tenure there. It was the Bruce Smiths, the Deion Sanders, the going after the Jeff Georges. It was the big name stuff. And yet, like one of that report you're talking about, it's like bringing back Joe Gibbs was another example, right? Yeah. Where Washington just kind of, they wanted to take the shortcut to the winning, and it just never materialized. And I think to myself, I'm like, okay, well, what does this team really have to do to actually make it work? They got to get a quarterback. And Sam Howell has been encouraging at times in a lot of stuff, but for the most part, his pocket presence isn't probably good enough to play. And it's always gonna be this 8-8, 3-3 right now. It's always gonna be this 8-8 type of play, which is why they got off of Kirk Cousins, their last pretty good quarterback. It's why they fired Marty Schottenheimer after 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
It's all this stuff. And I think, to answer your question, I think Washington is trying to take a learn from the last 25 years approach to this whole thing. And maybe Bill's the answer, but it also feels like they're just trying to find the most well-rounded approach to the whole thing, which may or may not include him.
But, look, we've talked about this as well. As a general manager, not only your ability to evaluate and as your group, right? I'm talking about the team building group. I'm talking about head coach and GM. You have to make the right decision with your quarterback. That's how you're judged. I don't care how you look at it. You can have a badass defense. You can do whatever. If you don't have the quarterback, to have a midline quarterback thinking that that person's going to save jobs, win games, that's not always, it happens every once in a while, but it's not long standing. Look, I love the way that Sam competes. He's a tough dude and he plays hard. I have ties to North Carolina with my in-laws, so they're really big fans of his. I get that. The reality, though, is you, as a general manager and a team builder, you have to make a strong decision. Are we truly going to hitch our wagons to, those are the ones right now in the league. So who are they in the league right now? You could talk about Sam Howell, Desmond Ridder. Who else in the league are the guys that are kind of, we're trying to figure out who they are?
It doesn't last particularly long, right? Because if he plays, I get worried about this because I agree with you. I think Sam Howell is a backup quarterback is a backup quarterback on a Super Bowl team. To me, that's what he is, because he comes in the game, he gives you a little bit of a spark. You're not, Tyrod Taylor last night. I don't know if you watched Bills Giants, but like Tyrod Taylor is that kind of quarterback that gives you a respectable game when he has to start, but he's not gonna win you a game as a backup. Sam Howell is a guy that can come in and win a game against any team in the NFL. He can also lose a game against any team in the NFL. And to me, he's not like consistent enough in the pocket to win with. And so you can't, I just don't think it's tenable. And then the bigger part is the risk that he gives you a Daniel Jones type of year. You make the playoffs, you win a game, you pay him $40 million. And now your whole fan base is looking at overthecap.com, seeing when they can get out of that deal. That's, I think, the worry. Whereas if you build it from the ground up, you draft a guy like Trevor Lawrence high, or you draft a guy, like CJ Stroud high, and you work with him, then you can build it organically. And then when he's actually earned that contract, you're willing to say, okay, I'm going to give him the 40-50 million a year because I can build around it and it's a tried and true method. Everything else to me always feels a little bit band-aidy, and then you're like where the Vikings are, where it's just like,
Tennessee.
Tennessee. New York. And you're right. Tennessee's another one where that coach Vrabel is so good. He can coach his way out of a paper bag, but it's like you're so limited by the quarterback play, and so I feel like Washington has a perfect bridge quarterback, but don't let the success of that bridge quarterback week to week obscure the fact that you really need a real quarterback.
And we said this before, and this is not picking on Desmond Ridder, because again, I hear people come, talk about it outside, within the building, and they love that this kid, they think that he can get better. But back to, of course he can, and time will tell, but to really hang on, that's something that, you have to have a very, very sort of acute eye to say, like, let's face the facts here. Is he the person that you're going to build with for years to come? So let's just go over to Atlanta. Or is he a person back to bridging? And how far do you bridge? How long does Arthur Blank want to bridge with a quarterback? That's not Arthur's makeup. And I say it with all due respect. Arthur's a competitive dude. He put himself online, saying that this is the guy we are growing with into the future. Because, of course, Arthur and Terry Fontenot have given him that, as well as Rich McKay, I'm sure, because Rich is involved. And that's a big thing for them, right? Let's keep going. And again, they have some talent on that team. They've done a nice job building around, but and you have to figure out how you're going to do it with this quarterback. When you watched that game with Desmond, were those interceptions in your mind catastrophic? Were they by virtue of being interceptions, or you're like, oh man, you can't have such a great game like the game before Houston where he was just darting and then all of a sudden comes
I made
back?
a tweet in the middle of the game, and I tweeted something like, so this was halfway between where Washington had gotten a lead, but Atlanta was moving the ball pretty well. And I said, he's been profoundly not bad the last game and a half. And then he threw one right to the free safeties chat. And there was one where they were down by 8, and he just left it up there for the corner. They were not great. And they were interceptions that weren't bad luck. They were truly limitation. They were interceptions that were a product of his limitations as a quarterback. And so I think that if you're Arthur Smith and you see it and you're like, I struggle, and I'm not a coach. I've never coached before. But if I look at him and I say, is it a crime? Is it a sin of commission or omission? It's a sin of omission. He doesn't have that. He doesn't have the arm strength to make the throw he tried to make in the end zone to Drake London for that interception. And so that's where I get worried, right? Because if you're Arthur Smith, I think a lot of times you watch that tape and you're like, I can work with this. And then there are certain plays where you're like, he can't run that offense. So he can't run corners of that offense. He can run the fat of the offense, right? The play for play stuff for sure. And he's got some athletic ability. He ran for a touchdown, all this stuff. But there were limitations in his play yesterday that were glaring. And I think that if you're Arthur Smith, you got to go back to the drawing board and paper over those. And the problem with the Falcons is this is a very easy schedule. I say this every single year. And this was the year to get some wins on the board, right? You go 7-10, 7-10. You got to go 10-7 so that ownership is looking at you and saying this is going in the right direction. And the table was set for you to do that. If you go 8-9 or 7-10 again, that is what I worry about for that regime, because it was right there in front of them.
Well, that 3-3 situation, 3-2 on the way to 4-2, or 3-3 now. This is one of those situations, and I don't want to answer for Atlanta here, but I would just say times when I've been in that mode where it's kind of like you're right there, right? You're right at cutting time, and you're like, you think about it, you talk about it with the owner, and the owner says, "Okay, what are we doing?" And you talk GM, head coach, and owner, and you're usually discussing when is the time. When we have Tyler Heineke here, like, where he's a competitive guy, right? We've seen what he's done. He probably wanted nothing better.
He's Sam Howell. He's Sam Howell.
Yeah, but he's waiting. He's wondering where does the team, think about that, everyone, all the listeners, think about that's not an easy spot to be in. Arthur Smith has been very outspoken that this is the dude we're going with. I get it. There also is a time, however, you got to sit back. You got to take a deep breath. You can't worry about what the media is saying or people like us are saying. You have to think what is best for the organization. And this is a tough time right now. 3-3. Do you want to go 3-4, 3-5, 3-6? That's not where you want to be. So,
well, and you're worried about this, and it's a modern problem, Thomas, right? You didn't have this back in the day. I remember when you were on Cleveland, they went Kosar to Testaverde to Rippon and they went back and forth. Nowadays, once you bench a quarterback, his career as your quarterback, like Zach Wilson, when the Jets benched him last year, they made the decision to go with Rodgers the next year, right? Like you don't, and I think that their worry is if they give up on him too quickly, it's over for him. And now you've invested all this capital, both emotionally and from like a legit capital, like draft capital and stuff, on this quarterback, only to give up on him. And so it's a good question. Atlanta this week is in another game where they're basically, it's basically a pick 'em for them. And so, maybe they could go to 4-3 and everything's fine. But I think, you start to get into that 3-5, 4-5, 4-6 range. I think that's when they're really going to start to ask questions about, have you really invested what you're supposed to in this position? I'm looking right now. The Falcons go to Tampa Bay next week. They're 2.5-point underdogs. Tampa Bay just got beaten up pretty badly by Detroit, but Tampa's in first place in the division. If the Falcons win that game, right? New Orleans plays on Thursday. Falcons win that game, they're in first place in the division. at least tied with New Orleans. So maybe while they're always sort of in this, if we win this game, we're in first place in the division, they'll stick with Ritter. But once they start to fall behind, maybe they go with Heineke, and maybe that ends up just being their approach here.
Well, look, they have a lot on their minds for sure, and they're again, they have a good combination of players. And like I've said time and again, I think Arthur Smith is a really good head coach. I really do, and I think and honestly, I like what their defensive staff is doing. They're playing hard. Those guys are flying around. There's some players on there. I mean, you talk about a safety that when I watch him, man, he's just. I love the way that he's flying around making plays all the time as well. Look, I just think they have a side to them. Although Matt Ryan, before we move on, did Matt Ryan make a comment in the game about this being an undisciplined football team? Did you hear that?
I didn't hear that just because I was kind of watching all the games at once. Okay. But that's interesting. I didn't know Calais Campbell got his 100th career sack. Like, he's been a veteran presence for them. But you're right about the defense. I mean, when you hold an NFL team under 200 yards, you've done a good job. And but that's interesting that you would say that. I mean, like that does kind of coincide with some of the on-field stuff that's gone wrong for them, though.
Yeah, and look, we can stop talking about Atlanta right now, but the reality is now, in my mind, I keep saying that the reality is they are in still a sound place. No one needs to panic. There needs to be no panicking out there by the fan base and the media. It's more watch closely how they approach this. And to your point, if it goes 4 and 5 wins, they'll settle in. If it goes the opposite way, it's going to be interesting to see how long it takes for them to give Heineke a shot.
Yeah, for sure. The last thing I want to talk about before I let you go, because I want to get you back on the bike here. The Bears lose at home to the Vikings. Justin Fields dislocates his thumb. They're now 1-5. The Vikings moved to 2-4. Vikings weren't impressive either. These are two franchises where the general managers were hired at the same time, the coaches were hired at the same time, and you watch that game, and I want your opinion on this because it felt like a wake. Like, I watched the game, and it just felt like the vibes were so bad, right? And you get this little Division II quarterback. He comes in, he lights a spark a little bit, but there was without Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins had no energy. It was, and they weren't, and they basically ran the ball to Alexander Madison the entire game as well. I watched that game and I'm thinking to myself, are these two regimes that 2 years in, a lot of excitement, Vikings 13 wins last year, the Bears with all the excitement coming into this year, how do you reclaim any of that excitement now that two teams are kind of out of the playoff race and quarterback's hurt on one side, the best player on the other team's hurt on the other side? Like, how do you rebound from this?
This is tough, man. Let's step back a little bit here. And this name that I'm going to mention here, Kevin Waren. You know that name?
Oh yeah, Big Ten commissioner for a while during COVID.
Yeah, that's right. Was with Minnesota forever. Was good friends with Rick Spielman, right? Whatever. I mean, I'm just saying he was there for quite a while with Rob Brzezinski and group. He takes over as the president. Excuse me. After I'm so sorry. After the new regime took over, right? So this is his first year as a president. You don't think he has a ton on his plate? What does he do in this situation? I'm thinking it's completely, the idea of concentrating on how they're going to deal with this. Are they going to make changes on the coaching staff, on the coordinator side? Do they go as much as making changes, in Chicago at the head coaching spot? Is there also talk about management? And the only reason I bring that up is you have a guy like Kevin Waren. You don't think there is a ton on his plate. How does he make the right move?
And they're trying to get public financing for a new stadium outside of the historic Soldier Field. And you think about this on one side of the plate, Thomas, we talked about the Cardinals last week. Currently, the Bears have the first pick, which is the Panthers pick. Yeah. And they have another pick of their own in the top 5. They're holding on to a quarterback that probably has some utility to another team. Like, that could be a very attractive job to another general manager candidate. You're in one of the 3 most popular, the 3 most popular cities in the United States of America. and and again, a new stadium pot. There's appetite for a new stadium in at least among other owners. Like there's a lot of possibilities there, but yet that's going to require moving off of people that you just hired a year and a half ago.
Look, I think it's completely premature to think about even thinking about a change in the management. I mean, Ryan Poles, good football man, but he's got a lot of pressure on him, right? To make a move, most general managers get an opportunity to hire two coaches. Most. However, we don't know the background, right? Are things really all over the place right now, given what was happening with the coach and all the stuff that was going on there? I'm talking about the coach who is no longer there. I forget his name. It's
Alan Williams.
Alan Williams. There's just a lot going on. So sometimes, the McCaskies, they're they care about perception. And so it'll be interesting to see with Kevin, again, back to Kevin Waren, being close with the McCaskies and talking about what the next steps are. I'll be interested to see if there were to be a change at the coaching side. Again, I sometimes hate even talking about that, but if there were, and all of a sudden Ryan Poles is in that spot where they're looking at a stud coach. I heard the same kind of thing about Washington with Bill Belichick, right? Historic team. That's a completely different situation. Ryan Poles, Bill Belichick is not ever, at least in my mind, is not ever going to another organization where he's not the dude there. So there's a lot on the plate there.
Yeah, and we talk about, oh my gosh, that team was down in the dumps. I mean, Bill Parcells took over a New England Patriots team that was about to move to St. Louis and made that thing into a Super Bowl team. And then Bill obviously took over and made that thing into what it is now. Like we think of these teams as immutable, but no, every single franchise has had its, ups and downs and will and could be attractive, right? We all thought that Mike McCarthy was going to go to Pittsburgh because that's where he's from. But he ended up going to Dallas, a historic franchise in and of itself. So like I said, I watched that game and I'm sad because I know, I know most of the people in those buildings, and I'm thinking to myself, like, there was so much excitement just a few weeks ago, and we're on this show. And again, I think this is a very prescient show. Like I'm saying to myself, I think expectations are too high on both sides. And I'm worried that on-field stuff is going to make people start to ask questions that either you should be asking now, which they weren't, or is an overreaction. And I think it's both in both cases an overreaction. Both Minnesota's struggled start as well as Chicago's.
And I would just say this before we move on. I know we're going to be cutting it close today, but I think this is imperative for the owners if they're truly behind their guys. They don't need to assuage the fan base, right? Come right damn out and come out and be very aggressive and say, look, these are the people we're staying with or not, right? Don't just kind of hang it over. That's just not in my mind. Now I've been on both sides of it. You want your owner to be behind you, right? You want him to be behind the head coach. They have not said anything, right? I haven't heard it on both sides. No. So, is this going to be a situation that becomes much more like EPL, right? Where there's within 18 months, the people are turning over a lot quicker than they used to.
Well, and that's never been the way in Minnesota, for example. I think Leslie Frazier in my lifetime was the shortest tenured coach there at 3 years. And I think for the Bears, in my short memory, I mean, Ditka was there forever. Dick Duran got his shot. Wanstead got his shot. This would be, for both franchises that played yesterday, this would be a drastic change from what is usual to move off of a coach or a regime that quickly. I think only Fran Foley, Thomas, got less time, and that was because he forged kind of his entire resume when he was the triangle of authority with Childress and the Wilfs and him back in 2006. So interesting stuff. I think this is a perspective. By the way, thank you all for coming to the stream. A lot of support last week. I think the episodes have been wonderful. Can't wait to come back Wednesday and talk about some other league topics. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Tell somebody about the show. This is one of my favorite things to do every single week. Thomas, any parting words?
No parting words. I just want to say this. This is interesting. See this here? This is called a monocle. Remember monocles back in the day when you were studying history?
You put it on your eye, yeah.
Well, those of us who have glasses and we don't want to have glasses when we're out mountain biking or doing something physical, you can have this in your shirt, and if you have to check your phone, and check and see that, hey, I'm a little bit late for the show. Can I and be able to type? It's just the only reason I bring it up is because it's become kind of a hot thing now with the outdoorsy athletic types out there that can kind of get themselves out of a bind. They don't have to wear glasses all the time like you do.
I one time, my dad offered to pay for LASIK. I didn't wear contact lenses for 2 weeks. I prepped for it and I chickened out. I think that was one of the worst mistakes of my life. By the way, I do actually remember the Les Steckel days. Les Steckel did own the former leader of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. That was a one-year head coach for the Vikings in between Bud Grant and right before. Bud Grant had 2 tenures, and then they went with Jerry Burns, who, by the way, is still the best quote in the history of the NFL. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you for remembering to talk about the monocle. I completely slipped my mind, which will surprise you. So, for Thomas Dimitroff, for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.